Your whole crazy thought on why SHEDEUR Sanders fell as bad as he did.
Yeah, he was in a kind of unique situation. I don't know about like the off-field stuff. I don't want to get too much into that stuff. I don't really know it, but I do think there was something to it to where teams kind of viewed him as, hey, if you don't come in here as a starter, do we see a lot of value in you as a backup? Do we want to deal with locker room liking the backup a lot? Like you just kind of saw it. Like look at the Browns players that responded when SHEDEUR was drafted. They didn't respond like that to Dylan Gabriel. So they responded pretty heavily on social media, though they were excited about SHEDEUR. So, what does that mean for his future? I don't know. But yeah, I think there was, look, we all had the concerns about the physical traits. We had the concerns about the play style. I really like SHEDEUR. I probably would have taken him a whole lot higher. But also, I wasn't in the room. So, if the interviews didn't go great or if they didn't really get the vibe that he was committed to football, maybe as much as they wanted, then that's how that drop happens. So shocking, yeah, but that's how the draft goes. And the NFL generally doesn't really put a lot of day two stock into quarterbacks. It's usually first round or day three.
Connor, your thoughts to Deion Sanders really hurting both his sons in their draft stock. Shiloh was not going to be drafted. We all know that. But SHEDEUR was supposed to be a top 20 prospect. I think a lot had to do with Deion Sanders and some of the off the field kind of stuff that he has done over the last couple of weeks that's hurt his son hurting himself. Your thoughts to the whole Deion Sanders debacle?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ian kind of touched on it. It's there's a difference between character concerns and maturity concerns, and I think a lot of Shadeur's concerns were more maturity than character. He didn't have any crazy off the field allegations or anything like that that really flagged him as a player. But as Ian said, I think when you're on day two and you're drafting a guy to be your backup, it's how much stock do you put into that character? You have to have a guy come in and play 2 or 3 games or 2 or 3 series. You want every guy on the field to have faith that you're going to step in and do the things to lead the team to victory or success or whatever that is. Shadeur's accurate. He's not a great athlete by any means. He's not the physical specimen that you want to see for a starter. But I think that when you're drafting a quote unquote backup quarterback, you look for a guy who can play with accuracy, a little bit of timing. And I think he showed signs of that at Colorado. His pocket presence wasn't great. He doesn't have the best footwork in the pocket when he is pressured. So I think those are concerns that NFL teams saw. And I think some of it was the maturity stuff. And I think some of it just saw a quarterback that still has a long ways to go and he doesn't have the physical traits that are really starter quality. So how high do you take that guy when you do factor in some of the lower end traits at the quarterback position and then some of the character and family, questions with Deion being in the picture all the time?
Mr. Vogel, I'm sure you have your own thoughts to the SHEDEUR Sanders, which was the biggest story really throughout the draft. Crazy to say that because Cam Ward was the number one pick and nobody was talking about Cam Ward. Everybody was talking about where's SHEDEUR going? Why is he dropping? Meanwhile, this guy was the number one pick and really the best quarterback in this class in my eyes. Why do you think SHEDEUR was so big when it came to this draft? Do you really think that Cam Ward was really flushed by the whole SHEDEUR Sanders situation?
A lot of people in this draft were kind of flushed by it because it was the constant narrative and storyline throughout the entire draft was why hasn't SHEDEUR been drafted? And it kind of took away, I think, from a lot of those guys that were picked before him because we're talking about it. And that's on us on the media side. That's on us. We should have been celebrating with those guys that were picked. But in the case of SHEDEUR, I think you have to really study the way that he approached his pre-draft cycle. And I think this was the real fall of SHEDEUR. You go to the Shrine Bowl, you don't practice, you're very limited while you're there. Then you go to the Combine and you don't throw, you don't do anything there. You skip out on the Big 12 Pro Day, which, okay, a lot of players did. But you're holding yourself as a top 5 prospect, essentially. And that obviously wasn't the feedback that he was really getting. They were still kind of playing into that mantra, almost that delusion, as I want to almost put it. You got to take the feedback that you're getting from the league. You got to take every opportunity to compete. And especially with some of the reports from the interviews, I heard a lot about the interviews directly right after the combine from people first and second hand in those meetings. And I didn't hear anything positive about them at all. So I think that at the end of the day, if he'd gone out there and he had attacked this pre-draft cycle with the ability, with the desire to compete, I think that this might have gone very differently for him. I think the last thing I'll mention is that video where he and Cam Ward are working out that's gone viral since he's been drafted, where he's asking about making a song with Cam, and Cam's telling him, no, I'm a football player. I want to be known as a football player, not a rapper. I think that right there epitomizes as well the difference in the mentality that these guys had when they walked into those interviews.
Mike, obviously, you got a chance to see what Shedeur had to say going in after the night, Thursday night, and the first round. He spoke to all the people that went to his party. And did you see what he rented? Obviously, he's wearing a $2.5 million necklace, and this guy just flaunts everything. But he was at a party like $150,000 for his family to come and sit and hang out at this draft thing.
It was like a draft booth, and Deion Sanders. It was some kind of
ridiculous.
company.
What were your thoughts getting a chance to hear what he had to say after the first round, and then really just going out there after the first round and going into a booth and rapping?
Yeah, I mean, I hope it works out for him. There are a couple angles here. I want to touch on something Ian said to kick this off, which is if NFL teams decide that you're a starting quarterback, you usually go in the first round or the top of the second round. And if they decide that you're not, those quarterbacks all get pushed down. And this is something where, I think because of Shedeur's celebrity, we're kind of making a huge deal about this, but it's a little bit more common than I think a lot of people realize. Some recent examples of Sam Howell maybe wasn't quite as big of a prospect, when we got to the pre-draft process, but he was certainly someone where, if we're being honest with ourselves, the media thought maybe first round in January and February of that draft cycle. Going back a little bit further, Connor Cook, a lot of people thought he was going top 15 back in that draft. He fell all the way to day 3. Of course, that was the Cowboys wanted him. The Raiders ended up drafting him. The Cowboys had to sell for Dak Prescott. It worked out okay for them. But then the other guy, now this is going back a little bit further. If you remember the E.J. Manuel draft, you can go right up to draft week. Almost everybody had the Bills taking Ryan Nassib, the quarterback from Syracuse, in the first round. And I'm talking about a day before the draft. And he fell to the 5th round. So this happens when the NFL decides that, this isn't a starting caliber quarterback. They get pushed down to day 3. And I think that that's what happened, along with sort of the factor of, you heard about, John talked about some of the things with the interviews. It's obviously a factor. And, if you're a good starting quarterback, teams are willing to deal with that. If you're not, even if you're a solid backup, teams just don't really want to deal with that. And we saw that with Tim Tebow, right? Tim Tebow didn't have character issues, but just his celebrity sort of forced him out of the league a lot sooner than it should have. And, we saw that with Kaepernick too, right? When he was 29, 30 years old, he kind of got forced out of the league once, he wasn't quite as at the level that he was when he was winning playoff games and getting the Super Bowls.
Ray, obviously you're a Cowboy fan, and you sit here and you wonder, why did the Cowboys draft Shedeur Sanders? They want Deion Sanders to come there. Maybe in the future they have a chance to bring in Deion Sanders. What is that? Is that music over there? Are we listening to some of that music? I don't know where that's coming from. But what are your thoughts to why the Cowboys didn't decide to make a move for a guy like Shedeur Sanders in any one of those first 4 rounds of the draft?
Well, the money with Dak's contract, first off, just makes it unfeasible for them to really make any moves at quarterback for the next few years. I think that's probably the main thing first and foremost, regardless of Jerry's penchant for a circus around the Dallas area there and the Cowboys. So I think that's the main thing more than anything else. And, you talk about Deion, and Deion could approach the draft process back when he was a prospect because he was Deion Sanders. You can get away with that when you are arguably the best cornerback of all time and can play professional sports in multiple different sports. You can't do that if you're close to the baseline level starting quarterback in the league and don't have those plus physical traits. Half of us maybe couldn't even discern Luke McCown versus Josh McCown if we saw them walking down the street side by side. But one played in the league for 14 years, another for 18 years because they were dependable, reliable. Coaches didn't waste an ounce of sleep on them. And that's how they made their living, right? I mean, Jimmy Johnson, you want to talk about the Cowboys back in 1993, he famously cut a backup linebacker for falling asleep in a team meeting. And then there's that clip on NFL Films that someone asked him, well, what if that was Emmitt Smith? He says he would have tapped him on the shoulder and told him to wake up. And so when you have a high level of talent, you can get away with certain things. Shedeur Sanders does not have that level of ability to match the circus around everything that came with it, the private YouTube channel that followed him around everywhere he went. The teams just don't want that. Coaches want to just wear sweats, watch tape, give non-answers to the media, and then go home and watch more tape and get ready for the next week. They don't want to deal with all the extracurriculars, and I think that caught up to him.
Travis, there were conversations that Dable had him come in. He interviewed him. He wanted him to watch tape with him, and he couldn't answer any questions. He looked like he had no interest in going in and sitting with Dable. Do you think that was the reason why the Giants didn't even think about maybe drafting him in the first round? And do you think he hurt his chances of being a first-round draft pick because of the whole Dable situation?
I don't know if it was just Dable and the whole timing of the late visit and everything. That was just kind of already pre-planned, as I understand it. But I would say that based on everything I heard while at the Combine, and even like on the All-Star circuit when he was having limited time with a couple of teams, even at the Shrine Bowl, none of the interviews apparently went well. And one of the offensive coordinators who had multiple points of contact and interviews with SHEDEUR that I talked to immediately following the NFL draft said that SHEDEUR has a day 3 talent and first round character problems. So that's not exactly the kind of player that you want to spend high draft capital on. And whether it's true or not, we can argue about, SHEDEUR, he's not this way. Every NFL team apparently thought he had character problems enough to let him drop to the 5th round. And so beyond that, I mean, if you want to get into nitpicking his game, I think it's really easy. He's got major sack issues. Oh, but it's the offensive line. Yeah, it was like 2 years ago, maybe. But even then, it was like above like bottom quartile performing offensive line. People just needed an excuse to make his 25-yard sacks make sense. And so, yeah, when you look at his peak productive season, he still had negative rushing yards because, in college, they count the sacks against you and your rushing totals. And that kind of sack issue mixed with the lack of mobile upside to offset that doesn't get drafted in the first round ever. Unless you're Josh Rosen, because that was actually the last time we saw a quarterback go in round 1 with negative rushing yards in his peak passing season was Josh Rosen. And that went great, guys. So I think the NFL was just like, you know what? We could just not draft Josh Rosen with more character issues and pass. And so, easy decision. Kind of made sense to me.
Now, Mike, obviously, he's going to a locker room with, 5-6 quarterbacks on the roster. It makes no sense. You have Kenny Pickett there. He was a first-round talent. He's played for 3 different teams over the last couple of years. You have Joe Flacco, who's ancient. He's like 40-something years old and probably throws a football with his kids, or he's hanging out with his parents on their sofa, half the season. So you have him. You have Deshaun Watson, who doesn't keep his hands to himself, or probably keeps his hands in his pants. And then, you had Dylan Gabriel, who I think is a great young kid. I was at the Heisman Trophy dinner. Very, very nice kid. I think he could be a good player in this league if he develops right. And then you have SHEDEUR Sanders. How does this work in your eyes? You have all these quarterbacks, different ages, different personalities. How does this work in a locker room like the Cleveland Browns? This isn't the Pittsburgh Steelers. This isn't, these big organizations like the Broncos, who has a coach that actually knows how to coach quarterbacks. This is in with an organization that I like Stefanski. I think he's a great coach, but I think there's a lot of problems over there in that locker room, worse than the quarterback room. I don't know how this makes any sense. Your thoughts to that?
Yeah, I think the big approach heading into this season is that a lot of guys are going to have to battle for what type of spot they're going to have. SHEDEUR Sanders was a 5th-round pick, but if he comes into camp and is the first-round hype that we all saw earlier in this draft cycle, then he's going to have an opportunity to get on the field pretty early in his career. Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, obviously not the toughest competition to overcome, but obviously I think those are guys that you would like to have starting early just so both young quarterbacks kind of get that chance to sit on the sideline, learn a little bit. But I do think both guys, Gabriel and Sanders, are pretty experienced and pretty knowledgeable to where I trust what they could do from day one. Maybe not necessarily at a high level, but I do think coaches are big on finding that delivery man. They aren't necessarily chasing the entire upside of some of these top picks if they don't have it. So with a guy like Dylan Gabriel, who is very effective in the short field, is able to really capitalize on those open windows. A lot of coaches, especially an offensive-minded one like Stefanski, is going to feel pretty comfortable drafting him in the 3rd round and saying, hey, he can get the job done for me, and that's all I need because I know I can put this team in position to succeed.